Falling victim to big tech censorship, could Donald Trump prove to be the saviour of free speech online? Darren Grimes is an outsider weighing in on the former president's aptly named Truth platform that's taking on Twitter. As Wales encourages the public to dob offenders in, should you call the police if you see a parent smacking a child? Writer and broadcaster Anna May Mangan says it's a civil duty to try and save a child from immediate danger. But entrepreneur and author Rebecca Jane says even calling police would be snowflake behaviour. They'll do battle in the clash. Other media and political establishment using inane events like the UK's stormy weather to maintain Project Fear post-COVID, and maybe even set us up for future climate lockdowns. Also, as Playhouse theatregoers express horror at using gender-neutral toilets where women pass men at urinals, why are woke celebrities forcing people to use the toilet together? We'll tackle those topics and give you a first look at tomorrow's newspaper front pages in the Media Buzz from 10. Plus, as David Beckham celebrates this very disturbing photo shoot from his 17-year-old son, Cruz, when will that strange Beckham family stop subjecting their poor children to public embarrassment, all in the name of fame? And will Kate slide herself into top spot as I coronate a new Greatest Britain and Union Jackass before the end of the show? This is Dan Wootton tonight. Let's go. Just one thing first, though, at least Emily Maitlis is listening. Today, the Newsnight presenter quit the BBC after multiple apologies for expressing left-wing views on air and online. We all remember the most famous.
Evening. Dominic Cummings broke the rules. The country can see that, and it shocked the government cannot. But despite the resignation of one minister, growing unease from his backbenchers, a dramatic early warning from the polls, and a deep national disquiet, Boris Johnson has chosen to ignore it. Tonight we consider what this blind loyalty tells us about the workings of Number 10.
I'd been telling Maitlis to quit the publicly funded Beeb, where it's essential presenters do not express political opinions, and telling her she should join the private sector for months, because in the private sector she can be as lefty as she desires. If she wants to express her anti-Boris, anti-Tory views ad nauseum, she can do so by leaving the BBC and joining The Guardian. Surely if Emily Maitlis wants to express her opinion and make her disdain for Boris Johnson and the government clear, she can do that in the private sector. I think Emily Maitlis could go and have a brilliant career in the private sector. I'm sure LBC would pay her big bucks. She could do the same thing as Andrew Marr. That's exactly what's happened today. She'll join LBC, where she'll be right home alongside James O'Brien. Congratulations, Emily. And thank you for doing the right thing. You'll be much richer for it too. My superstar panel react to today's major developments in Russia in a moment. Here they are. Former Daily Star editor Dawn Neeson, conservative commentator Calvin Robertson, and the author and journalist Rebecca Reade. But with the latest on that growing crisis, the news now with Miranda Shunka.
Thank you, Dan. The top stories from the GB newsroom. The US president has announced a raft of economic sanctions after what's being described as the beginning of Russia's invasion into Ukraine. Joe Biden says President Putin's actions are a flagrant violation of international law, which demand a firm response. The US will now impose sanctions against 2 large Russian banks and sovereign debt. Oligarchs and their family members will also be targeted. Joe Biden also authorised the deployment of additional forces and equipment to strengthen Baltic allies, saying it's a defensive move, but the US has no intention to fight Russia.
This is the beginning of a Russian invasion of Ukraine, as he indicated and asked permission to be able to do from his Duma. Who in the Lord's name does Putin think gives him the right to declare new so-called countries on territory that belong to his neighbors? This is a flagrant violation of international law and demands a firm response from the international community.
Well, the move comes after the UK government imposed its own package of sanctions. The Prime Minister announced action against 5 Russian banks and 3 very high net worth individuals. Boris Johnson told MPs that Russia's troop deployment amounts to a renewed invasion of the country.
We will not allow Putin to drag our continent back into a Hobbesian state of nature where aggression pays and might is right. And it is precisely because the stakes are so high that Putin's venture in Ukraine must fail.
Well, Russia says it started evacuating its diplomatic personnel from Ukraine because they're receiving death threats. The move comes after President Vladimir Putin was given the green light by the Russian parliament to deploy armed forces abroad for peacekeeping tasks. There are fears that could open the door for a broader attack on Ukraine. President Putin says the situation on the ground in Donbass will dictate the actions of the military. In other news, severe flood warnings have been issued for parts of the West Midlands and Yorkshire. The Environment Agency says water levels could still rise in areas around the River Severn and the River Ouse after heavy rain fell during Storm Franklin. Flood-hit communities are calling on the government to fund permanent defences now after dozens of homes were evacuated. And a legal requirement to wear face masks in shops and on public transport will end on March the 21st in Scotland. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon says that using restrictions to suppress COVID infections are no longer needed. Coronavirus passports are also being scrapped for nightclubs and large events. In contrast to England, the Scottish Government will continue its free testing programme and will advise people who test positive to keep isolating. Well, on TV, online and DAB plus radio, this is GB News. Now let's get straight back to Dan Wootton tonight.
Over the last fortnight, there have been a lot of comparisons to Munich and those futile negotiations with Hitler in the months before World War II. Well, we now know who the Neville Chamberlain figure in this latest appeasement failure is. Step forward Emmanuel Macron, the French president with small man syndrome, who has been utterly humiliated by the Russian tyrant Putin. Given Macron returned from Moscow earlier this month and assured his citizens he had received a pledge from Russia that the Ukraine crisis would be de-escalated. While the Labour Party would have you believe Boris Johnson is being treated as some sort of joke on the international stage, that actually couldn't be further from the truth. His leadership in defending Ukraine from an illegal Russian invasion has been so effective that even Germany today reversed its appalling policy to appease, with Chancellor Olaf Scholz making the morally correct but financially devastating decision to halt the controversial Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Boris knows the world must hit Vladimir Putin where it hurts, his pocket. And today he led the way, announcing the first step in a promised barrage of financial sanctions, dismissing Putin's claim to Ukraine as absurd and even mystical.
Today, the UK is sanctioning the following 5 Russian banks: Rossiya, IS Bank, General Bank, Promsyaz Bank, and the Black Sea Bank. And we are sanctioning 3 very high net worth individuals: Gennady Timchenko, Boris Rottenberg, and Igor Rottenberg. Any assets they hold in the UK will be frozen. The individuals concerned will be banned from travelling here. And we will prohibit all UK individuals and entities from having any dealings with them. This is the first tranche, the first barrage of what we are prepared to do.
Boris was right to stress the UK will continue to seek a diplomatic resolution till the last possible moment. I mean, we don't want war. But as it stands, Putin seems to have gone stark raving mad. He is ignoring warnings that a full-scale invasion of Ukraine could bring down the Russian Federation and end his presidency. And unlike Macron, Boris has got this right from the off.
This is, I should stress, just the first barrage of UK economic sanctions against Russia, because we expect, I'm afraid, that there is more Russian irrational behaviour to come. And the sad thing is that at every turn in this crisis, the UK's pessimistic predictions have been vindicated. We said that there would be false flag operations, and there have been false flag operations. We said that there would be provocations in the Donbass, and that's exactly what we're now seeing. And I'm afraid all the evidence is that President Putin is indeed bent, as you said just now, on a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And the overrunning, the subjugation of an independent, sovereign European country. And I think that, let's be absolutely clear, I think that would be absolutely catastrophic if Vladimir Putin continues down this track of violence, of aggression, of a full-scale invasion, of encircling Kiev itself, which is what he seems to be proposing to do, capturing the Ukrainian capital. It is absolutely vital that that effort, that conquest of another European country should not succeed, and that Putin should fail.
While there is an international energy crisis sure to be exacerbated now, at least the UK is only reliant on Russia for 3% of our supplies. The EU, which gets 42% of its imports from Russia, must never rely so heavily on Putin for oil and gas again, especially given we were all here just a few years ago after Putin's takeover of Crimea.
We've got to recognise that we were not tough enough, and in the end, we didn't do enough as Europeans to wean ourselves off Russian hydrocarbons, off Russian oil and gas. And to a certain extent now, the vagaries of the price in gas, the spikes in gas prices to which European economies are so vulnerable, is a consequence of that failure to move away from that dependency. That's what we've got to do now. We've got to make sure that we cut the umbilicus, we snip the drip feed into our bloodstream from Nord Stream.
He's right, of course. But no country has made itself more reliant on Russia than Germany. So I say thank goodness the new Chancellor Scholz finally got tough today. All Western democracies, even Macron and France, must now back Boris and unite against Putin, the war criminal. To respond now, my superstar panel, former editor of the Daily Star, Dawn Neeson, the Conservative commentator Calvin Robinson, and the author and journalist Rebecca Reade. Dawn Neeson, obviously, we don't want action. It's right that diplomacy continues. However, it's looking like we may have to start thinking about going there.
I really hope and pray that it doesn't come to that, Dan. There has to be a democratic solution to this. We can't afford to risk another war. I mean, I was in Bosnia and covered some of the awfulness that happened there. And the thought of that again happening on our doorsteps is just unbearable. I mean, I interviewed people that were literally willing to kill neighbours they'd lived next door to for 20, 30 years. And it was just insanity. And to see this happening again now is heartbreaking. I've got a friend who lived in Ukraine and she used to work as a hairdresser over here. And she's carrying on her life as normal. And you can't quite get your head around what is happening to them, how they're feeling. I mean...
No, because an air raid warning could come in Kiev at any moment.
So they've gone in the space of a few days from leading normal lives. And people are thinking, oh, it's the Ukraine. They're just like us. They're no different.
I know, but Calvin, I hear all of that. But unfortunately, if you appease Putin and Russia now, which I know many folk on the right, you know, say that is the way to deal with this. But I think if you do that, Putin doesn't stop. He doesn't just accept, oh, Ukraine's not going to get NATO membership, so we're going to move away now. I mean, he wants to regain Ukraine at almost any cost. And that is, I potentially just the start of his plans.
Yeah, I think the Prime Minister's response has been spot on. We learned this from Mrs Thatcher's day. The way to hit the Russians is economically. That's been outstanding so far, so hopefully it sticks to that. But what's been interesting is the way the BBC reported this, saying that Putin has ordered in peacemakers, not saying that this is an invasion, saying he sent peacemakers into Ukraine. I find that outrageous. Also interesting, Biden's response. He seems very weak and feeble, doesn't he, in comparison to Boris Johnson?
He really does. And it's interesting, isn't it? The words might be the same, but Biden doesn't have respect from the international community. And he looked like a doddery old fool earlier tonight.
And that's what worries me personally. I don't think we've got strength in America, and this needs to be a global thing. We all need to...
But we don't have strength. We have a president of the US who at least looks like he's suffering from dementia.
Yes.
And it's very, very difficult to trust him. So that's why I have a lot of faith of Boris in this case, because he's got a handle on this. Rebecca Reade, what's your take on the situation?
I think what they need is a team of women who've had really bad breakups, who know how to think about how to really hit someone where it hurts. Because what they need to do is make life as uncomfortable as possible for the top Russian people and their wives. So I'm thinking, about a third of public schools are full of children from abroad. Russia, big consumer, so no more Eton, no more Harrow. Birkins, no more Birkins. Can't shop in New York, can't go to Monte Carlo, can't go to any of the nice places on holiday. I tell you, genuinely, you take away everything that is nice about being friends with Europe, suddenly, no more.
Take away their dirty money. You do feel, though, explain this to me, you think that Putin has been treated differently by what the international community, the media, because he's white and European?
I think there is an element of that. I think if you compare how the American response has been, and I didn't want Trump to be president anymore, but I don't think Biden's covered himself in glory. And I have this feeling that the American sentiment would be different were he a Middle Eastern dictator. I think there is this perception that people are more dangerous if they are brown and Muslim, and somehow because Putin is white and European, he's maybe a little bit less scary, and that's very, very wrong. He is very scary and very bad, and if you were worried about Saddam Hussein, you should be very, very worried about Putin.
Calvin Robinson?
On that note...
Your take?
Well, what's quite interesting about this is that you're right about the sentiment is different. Where are the protesters? Where are the people on change.org? Where are the people out with the placards saying Free Ukraine? Interesting that they'd be out if it was a different country, wouldn't it?
But I don't think there is that kind of slightly patronising paternalism towards people of Ukraine, because, again, they are white Europeans, so you don't get that kind of white saviour complex about, like, let's save the little brown people that you get when it is a country that people perceive to be weak.
Yeah, hypocritical left.
I don't think it's just the hypocritical left. I think there is a perception from a lot of white people that anybody who isn't white needs their help, when actually a lot of the time what people would like to be is just treated as people.
Well, I think, Dawn, we're all terrified of Putin. I think the issue is that none of us want a full-scale war, and that's the issue. So that's the reason why many folk are trying to appease Putin. Unfortunately, I think trying to appease Putin leads us to a very scary place. We should have learnt that in 2014, and we didn't.
We should have learned it with the Crimea, you're quite right, and we didn't. We should have been much stronger then, and I think that's why he thinks he can get away with it this time. But I think that the sanctions are the way forward. I really hope they work.
Yeah. And by the way,
he's playing a dangerous game, though, Dan, isn't he? Because he wants to go down in history.
Of course he is, but this is the point. He could lose the presidency over this.
I'm being slightly flippant when we talk about social sanctions, but genuinely, in the Falklands, you couldn't buy polo ponies from Argentina for this exact reason. And this stuff does genuinely start to work.
And the sanctions have to get tougher. I have heard a lot today by the hawks in the Conservative Party and actually a lot of folk within Labour that the sanctions have not been tough enough. But the point was, this is just the start. This is the start. And actually, you've got to keep that threat on, and it has to be a programme of rolling, growing sanctions as Putin's behaviour gets worse and worse. But look, we're going to keep on the story, of course, if there's any breaking developments throughout the show. Dawn Neeson, Calvin Robinson, Rebecca Reade, thank you so much. My superstar panel are here all night. But still to come, how did we all end up following COVID rules that made absolutely no sense whatsoever? Well, world-famous social media activist Zuby is called to my lockdown inquiry to explain how governments terrified their citizens into compliance at 9:30. But next in The Clash, should you call the police if you see a parent smacking a child? That's what the Welsh Government wants. Well, writer and broadcaster Anna May Mangan takes on entrepreneur and author Rebecca Jay next in The Clash. But let me know what you think. Email me, dan@gbnews.uk. Tweet me using the handle @gbnews. We have our poll running there now. We'll reveal the results after the break.
Good evening. The winds are calming down at the moment, but they're going to pick up again tomorrow. A windy Wednesday with wet weather for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Largely dry day to come across most of England and Wales. This weather front's been pushing south today, and it's going to be followed by a similar one tomorrow. And as that one approaches, the isobars squeezing together, so the winds will increase through tomorrow. But at the moment, certainly compared to recent days, the winds are a lot lighter, and with clear skies, that's allowing temperatures to fall. So quite a cold night across England and Wales. But here comes that next band of rain into the northwest, and the winds picking up here as well. Enough of a breeze to stop too much of a frost, but certainly in the countryside, temperatures are likely to drop down close to zero. But a bright start for the Midlands, southern and eastern England on Wednesday. Some good spells of sunshine. The winds will strengthen though. We do have a Met Office yellow warning across northeast England and southeast Scotland. Gusts of wind of 40, 50, maybe 60 miles an hour. A wet afternoon for Northern Ireland and central Scotland, and the rain starting to turn more and more to snow across the far northwest as colder air pushes in here, but quite mild still for England and Wales, where, bar the odd shower, most will have a dry day. We will see the rain pushing southwards, though, during Wednesday night, and then we're going to see more of the snow showers coming in, and we have another Met Office yellow warning for snow and wind across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, and that lasts well into Thursday as well. We'll start with rain across East Anglia and the southeast on Thursday. That should scoot away, and then we'll see sunshine and showers, but these showers of snow could cause some problems with the snow really building up, especially on some of the higher routes. But even at low levels for a time, some snow on Thursday across western Scotland and Northern Ireland, perhaps even into parts of southeast Scotland. With those strong winds, that's going to make for some pretty hazardous driving conditions. Sunny spells for many elsewhere on Thursday, but it's going to feel cold wherever you are.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News. Zuby and Darren Grimes both on the way, but first it's time for The Clash. Now, as of next month, a so-called smacking ban will be introduced in Wales, and folk have been urged by the government to call the police on any parents they see punishing their children. The change means adults who physically discipline kids will be charged with assault and have a criminal record, a marked departure from the current law in England where smacking is allowed, providing it is, quote, reasonable punishment. The Welsh Government has said the ban, which follows Scottish legislation to outlaw smacking in 2020, is to protect children's rights. But Gareth Davies of the Welsh Conservatives has accused Mark Drakeford's Labour government of being unable to let go of the authoritarianism developed during the pandemic. He said, a campaign that urges people to report those who use more traditional parenting methods, the nosy ones in the Labour government, is introducing a Stasi culture to Wales. I urge the Labour government to urgently rethink the campaign and inform parents of the new law rather than urge people to report their fellow citizens who are parenting their children as they see fit. So what do you think? Should people call the police if they see a parent smacking a child? Send me your thoughts to dan@gbnews.uk. Tweet me at GBNews. While you're there, go vote in our poll because I'll be revealing the results very shortly. But to debate this now, I'm joined by entrepreneur and author Rebecca Jane, who thinks the Welsh Government has gone too far, and the writer and broadcaster Anna May Mangat, who can't understand why you wouldn't report a parent smacking a child. Good evening to you both. Rebecca Jane, you think this has gone too far. Is that because you've smacked your own kids and you think that it is part of disciplining and raising good young people?
Yes, absolutely, Dan. I think that this is once again more snowflakey, woke behaviour and people just needing to have a reason to have outrage about something. There's a very big difference in smacking your child for disciplinary purposes and abusing your child. Nobody's going to stand by anybody that abuses a child, but I was smacked as a child probably no more than a handful of times, and I can say the same for my children. I grew up okay. My children have grown up actually pretty well, and I'm very proud of them. So wholeheartedly, I don't agree with what the Welsh Government are now saying, and I'm just very glad that I'm English.
So Anna May, if you were in a supermarket, for example, and you saw an otherwise respectable-looking parent give their young child, maybe a 4-year-old, a little slap on the hand, like we just saw in that advertisement, you'd call the police.
Well, I hope I wouldn't need to, because this new legislation should let parents know that it's just not acceptable. And I do think parents should be criminalised for smacking their children. And who defines what a smack is? A tap on the hand. I mean, really, if you're close enough to give a child a smack on the hand, then you're close enough to talk to them. You're close enough to move them away. You're close enough to do something else. And I just love Rebecca Jane's argument that it didn't do me much harm. Well, it obviously did do you harm, because you're inflicting harm on your children because it was inflicted on you.
Rebecca Jane, do you want to respond to that?
I would advise you to keep your opinion about my upbringing to yourself, because I don't personally. Hang on a second. I don't personally believe that I've been harmed. I'm actually pretty well, and I'm okay with how I turned out. I'm not inflicting harm on my children either. They're in the next room watching this.
Yeah.
They know wholeheartedly what we're discussing.
You just got shirty with me for mentioning your upbringing. If you were sat next to me on this sofa and I was to give you a slap for saying that to me, how would you feel about that?
Are you my parent? Don't look like it.
No, but you're encouraging this culture of dealing with conflict and naughtiness by slapping someone.
No. I am actually dealing with children's behaviour with reasonable boundaries.
Well, that's where we disagree. It's entirely unreasonable to bear down.
Anna May, do you have children?
I've got 4 children.
And you've never smacked them? You've never given them a little tap on the hand?
It would be like someone who is 12 foot tall coming in here and giving me a smack. Instead of, I mean, what does a smack explain to a child? Absolutely nothing.
And were you smacked growing up, Anna May?
No. Other than what you teach your children by smacking them is that you can't cope.
So, Rebecca Jane, when you smack your children, you can't cope.
Oh, I know, right? No, I'm not going to agree with you, because my children have actually come out really well, as have I. And I understand the difference in boundaries. And unfortunately, today we see so many spoilt little bratty children who don't understand, because they have parents like you who go, no, then, darling, it wasn't okay to do this and to do that. It's not about constantly beating your child or constantly smacking your child. I have a nearly 16-year-old and I have a 9-year-old. In both of their lifetimes, the 9-year-old has probably been smacked twice, but she knows not to push me because she knows that that is something that I could do if I was forced into it. But also, you know, you talk about this whole reasonableness wholeheartedly. Yes, absolutely. It has to be reasonable, because then when you go too far, it's abuse and nobody's talking about that. But that just doesn't seem to be entering the realm of your thought process.
Well, three children a year, 3 children a month die from parental abuse. And so it starts somewhere. It starts somewhere. And let me ask you one more thing. If I was in a supermarket and your child was misbehaving next to me, would it be okay for me to smack your child? Or is it just a privilege because you love them so much, you're allowed to slap them?
You are absolutely correct. Yes, I do love my children. You got very personal with this, don't you?
Well, it is. I think it's really, because I think I'm protecting all children. What we're talking about here is a move from like when we used to send children up chimneys. That had to stop. And there's a culture change. And this new law is actually encouraging that. And also, I'm embarrassed for you that you go on television and talk about being willing to slap your children.
You can be wholeheartedly embarrassed for me. That's absolutely fine by you. I'm not. I'm going to stand entirely by it because I don't have spoilt, bratty children, and you won't be in a supermarket.
You might have. I've never met them.
No, it's not subjective. I know my children. Don't even try and go there.
Well, you do know. You know that you're honestly, very up close and personal with them, aren't you?
Brutally honest with you, this attitude that you have is everything that we don't want in our children today. This entitled, spoilt behaviour, and that you're just attacking somebody personally in the way that they bring their children up.
You're saying it's okay to smack children, and I'm taking the other view that it isn't. What's wrong with that?
And what about this idea of dobbing people in, though, Anime? I want to tap into that because, to me, I think, as Rebecca says, that really encourages a sort of woke society where we're all policing each other.
No, not where children are concerned. I mean, you have children because you love them and your first job is to protect them. And as a society, I think sometimes we have to protect other people's children as well. And as we know, social services are under terrible pressure.
You are the last person I would want to protect my children.
Well, I'm not smacking them, you are.
No, well, yes, twice in the youngest lifetime, yes. And like I've said to you,
how about never? How about taking never?
You may have your children behaving badly in a supermarket. I won't.
No,
it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen with either of them.
I'm not claiming to have my children are grown up now, and I've got grandchildren. I'm not claiming they're perfect. No child is, but I'm saying there are a lot better strategies than bending down and giving them a whack.
In your opinion, and also whack again is not reasonable.
Well, if you're enraged enough and out of control enough
but do you not think that this policy approach risks trivialising genuine abuse? Because what my worry is, we have a police force already overwhelmed, right? And they're going to get people calling them up because they've seen a stressed parent give their child a little slap on the hand in the supermarket. That's something they have to investigate. I just worry that we end up undermining the genuine abuse of children in this country, which is something that actually the police need a laser focus on.
But there is no acceptable level of smacking, in my opinion. And I think that by introducing the police, it won't... I've heard the argument as well, the police haven't got the resources or the money, what's it going to cost? But it won't cost much. I mean, because I think people will soon learn not to do it. It will bring about a massive change for the better.
Because we're all policing each other in society,
because we know that it's wrong, and we know that people aren't coming on TV and saying they're willing to smack their child. It won't be acceptable anymore for that to happen.
Final word to you, Rebecca J.
I just completely disagree with you. I think the only thing unacceptable is your woke and snowflake behaviour, and that is wholeheartedly something I'm never going to stand by in my life. I don't want children to grow up like you. I'm sorry. I want my children to grow up with boundaries, understanding other people's boundaries, and actually being pretty well disciplined.
Yeah,
and that is what I've brought up, and I just don't want them to have your attitude.
No, okay. Unfortunately, they'll have yours, which is the biggest problem for continuing this problem.
Fascinating debate. That was the entrepreneur and author Rebecca Jane and the writer and broadcaster Anime Mangan. A pleasure to have you both here. So who do you agree with? Well, Stephen on Twitter says, if I saw someone repeatedly striking a child, I would step in first. Then if the person refused to cease the abuse, I would call the authorities. I think you have to take each case on its own merits, and I think that's a very fair point. Philippa says, I would let social services know if the smack was excessive. And from Elizabeth, for smacking? No! How ridiculous. Beating a kid, however, is a different matter. And your verdict is now in. Just 14% of you agree that people should report parents who smack a child, while 86% of you say they shouldn't. Coming up, could Donald Trump be the saviour of conservative voices silenced online? GB News star Darren Grimes is tonight's outsider, giving his no-nonsense take on the former president's new social media platform, Truth. But next, the lockdown inquiry continues as we ask, how did the government end up terrifying their citizens into following rafts of nonsensical COVID rules? One of freedom's most vocal advocates, social media activist Zuby, joins me to give his unmissable evidence. That's straight after the break.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News. Next to give evidence to our lockdown inquiry is the freedom fighter Zuby. In one of his previous appearances on this show, the social media superstar and voice of the people argued that the risk of being exposed to disease is just part of being human. But during the lockdown, so many governments around the world seemed to lose their minds, and they conjured up increasingly nonsensical rules to prevent that from happening. And their attempts to cow people into obeying them, well, they're still having repercussions today. So Zuby, throughout the pandemic, you've called out regulations which make absolutely no sense whatsoever. So as part of this lockdown inquiry, I want to know why you think we all agreed to change our behaviour in these ways without proof that it was doing anything.
Hey, Dan. Well, I think the biggest factor at play is fear. I think that there's no emotion, there's no power that controls human beings and enables a party to control them, such as fear. Whether that fear is real, imaginary, manufactured, exaggerated, it doesn't matter. And I think when it comes to this, we're really talking about multiple fears here. So I think early on, there was clearly a lot of fear about the virus itself, about fear of death, fear of illness, fear of infection, totally understandable. However, I think another major part that it was playing a role and is still playing a role, in fact, is the fear of social ostracization or social judgment. As much as human beings are somewhat individualistic, we are also very much herd animals. And a lot of rules and policies and norms are enforced by whether or not you are conforming with the majority. So I think when it comes to a lot of policies, for example, many of the masking policies, I don't think, especially at this stage, with many people, it's not the virus that they are overly concerned about. They are simply trying to avoid conflict, or they are trying to conform and fit in with the majority of people. And I think it's hard to overstate just how important these social factors are. But if I could sum it up in one word, I would say fear.
No, I think you're right. I think you're completely right. Now, look, I want to examine now some of these completely bonkers rules. So actually, you've picked your top 10, which were imposed on at least one country's citizens. So I'll run through them and then you can talk at the end, Zubi. So number 1, mandatory masks outdoors. Number 2, mask shenanigans in restaurants, because of course the virus won't spread when you take your mask off to eat. Number 3, masks in gyms during workouts. Number 4, I hated this one-way systems in supermarkets and on streets. Number 5, curfews, because, you know, COVID clearly only spreads during the night, right? Number 6, pub rules regarding food and alcohol. So remember the Scotch egg rule in the UK. Number 7, mandatory quarantine after multiple negative tests post-international travel. Number 8, closing gyms for a virus where if you're morbidly obese, you're going to be at far greater risk of death. Number 9, different number limits for recreational and work meetings. And number 10, relentless testing. I mean, Zubi, you are completely right. All of those rules were completely bonkers. And by the way, didn't stop the spread of coronavirus at all.
No, there was that study that came out, I think it was from Johns Hopkins, which said that everything from the lockdown to the mandates, even the travel restrictions, had virtually no effect on the actual death rate, which, if you think about these things very logically, and it's not overly surprising. But the thing is that those of us who back in 2020 or early 2021 who were even trying to inquire about these, or who were critical of any policies, it was all, you are anti-science, you want people to die, you want grandma to die, so on and so forth. A lot of emotional blackmail was going on. And I think that was a huge problem. That was a massive, massive problem, because look, some of these rules are just arbitrary and silly, but as we know, there are many, especially the lockdowns and stay-at-home orders, which have very real impacts on people's physical health, people's mental health, the economy. We're now seeing inflation going through the roof, the impact that they've had on children's development, number of people missing diagnoses and treatments for things such as cancer. You know, there are other threats in the world besides COVID, and there always have been. There are a lot of people who every year, every day, die of all sorts of different things. There are a lot of problems. And anytime you're implementing a policy, you're always talking about trade-offs. So from the very beginning, you know I myself was saying, okay, well, what is the trade-off of these policies? Even if some of these things can be shown to slightly reduce the transmission rate or even the death rate, what does it mean on the flip side of that? And I think that now that people are calmer and calmer heads are prevailing, and the fear narrative is not as hysterical as it was in most places, people are now slowly starting to look up and question these things. But it's a shame that those who wanted to do this earlier on were so heavily demonized.
Well, of course, because I guess you look at the really damaging initiatives for society, like closing schools. Well, of course, it resulted in some sort of reduction in the spread of COVID immediately. But actually, in the long term, or even the medium term, it made no sense, because once schools opened up, Zubi, that's how we actually developed a degree of herd immunity, natural immunity amongst our kids, who are the group of people in society who are at least risk of being seriously impacted by COVID. So it actually made more sense to keep them open.
Mm-hmm. And I think another important conversation that was never had in any country or in any city, really, that I'm aware of, is one that is not so scientifically or medically based, but actually it's a philosophical question. If you think about it, Dan, for the past 2 years, all these countries, we've essentially been running under the notion that COVID is the most important thing, and that reducing transmission, hospitalization, death numbers is the most important thing. It's more important than other forms of threats. It's more important than other deaths. It's more important than civil liberties. It's more important than freedom and basic human rights. It's more important than treating people equally and fairly. It's more important than everything. But that conversation was never had. This is not me denying the threat of COVID. It's simply acknowledging the threat alongside other threats that exist and have always existed throughout this thing. Now, I'm off the top of my head, I believe that according to the official statistics, somewhere about around 5 to 6 million people worldwide over the past 2 years have died either with or from this disease. I don't know how to split that. However, in the same time frame, about 120 million people have died of everything else. About 60 million people worldwide die every single year. So, of course, 5 million deaths of any source is sad. Every single death is sad. But what's interesting is that people don't frame it. People are not even aware of that number.
Well, you talk about trade-offs. You talk about trade-offs, Zuby. And imagine if we'd said, OK, we're going to focus the entire resource of the world for 2 years to research cancer cures. And we're talking about trading off the lives of our young people. Because, of course, very old people who we do care a lot about are disproportionately impacted by COVID. But young people are disproportionately affected by lockdowns. And I think we missed that trade-off. But Zuby, let me just tell you finally, my most bonkers rule was actually in Scotland, where Nicola Sturgeon opened up the pubs and nightclubs so they weren't receiving any form of compensation, but then banned them from playing music. So I was up in Scotland. I went to a nightclub at 11 o'clock. There's about 4 people sitting there because you couldn't stand up either. So we were in a dead, silent nightclub. And I remember asking the bar manager, who was, of course, losing his entire livelihood as a result of this ridiculous rule. And I said, how do you feel about this? And he said, I'm okay, because Nicola Sturgeon's keeping us safe. And I just thought, whoa, that is brainwashing. That is brainwashing, because we were all allowed to be in that nightclub, but we weren't allowed to enjoy it. So it rendered the business useless. And I just thought, for me, that summed up the madness of nanny state COVID regulations.
Wow. I wasn't aware of that rule. I'd heard of some of the no dancing rules. And I know at weddings as well. I went to a wedding and I wasn't allowed to be served a drink unless I was sitting down. So
that was another one. We had to stay seated.
Yeah, I remember that one.
We had to stay seated. But no, Sturgeon banned music in Scotland. And one day, Zuby, the history books are going to call out these leaders who maybe got a lot of kudos at the time. But I think when we look on in many years' time, the likes of Sturgeon and Trudeau and Ardern are going to become enemies and villains of the COVID crisis. But so great to speak to you, Zuby. Thank you for joining us for the lockdown inquiry tonight. But coming up, our inane events like Storm Eunice, the new COVID for the media and political establishment's relentless Project Fear. One of my panellists thinks they're paving the way for future climate lockdowns, and the Superstar panel will weigh in on that at 10 p.m. Also, as Donald Trump launches the aptly named Truth social media platform, could the president, a victim of big tech censorship himself, be the one to save free speech online? Darren Grimes is tonight's outsider. He's here straight after the break.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate.
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel.
Right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News. Darren Grimes is tonight's outsider. Now, I'm very happy to admit Twitter has not been anywhere near as fun or interesting or dramatic or newsworthy since the anti-democratic ban on the former US President Donald Trump. But he's about to make his long-awaited return to social media with his much-anticipated Twitter rival, Truth Social. His first post is a real tease. He wrote, "Get ready. Your favourite president will see you soon." Although Trump's media critics have already latched on to the fact the app has had a few technical problems at launch. And believe me, I know all about that when it comes to launches. But Darren, Truth Social became the most downloaded app on Apple's store shortly after it was made public. So it looks like this could be a big hit, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's climbed to the top of Apple charts and has an absolutely huge waiting list. And this all comes, as you say, a year after that Twitter ban, that infamous Twitter ban. And let's not forget, Dan, that when it comes to Trump and Twitter, Trump actually put Twitter on the map. Without Donald J. Trump actually setting the agenda via that platform, I don't think Twitter would have enjoyed as much success as it has over recent years. But this Truth Social is the Trump Media and Technology Group actually fighting back against what it sees as a pervasive left-wing bias. It's basically, Dan, as if the BBC were the guardians of online speech, right? That's what being on social media feels like these days. And I actually make accounts on all of these new platforms because I never know if I'm going to be kicked off for, I don't know, saying I believe in biological sex or something like that. Do you know, Dan, I was listening to your conversation with Zuby there about the madness of the COVID restrictions that we've all endured over the past 2 years or so. And actually, it got me thinking about the fact that Zuby, for saying what he said about COVID lockdowns and about public health guidance and all these things, he might be kicked off one of these platforms for spreading so-called disinformation, right? For having a dissenting view, for actually making an argument against what is the COVID consensus.
Well, Darren, remember,
right?
of course, and remember near the start of the pandemic when folk like me were questioning China's role and whether this virus actually came from a lab leak in Wuhan, which I'm now convinced it did. But at the time, when I posted about this on my Facebook account, it was branded misinformation. So I think you're right. The social media companies need to be challenged. Also, Darren, just from a very basic point of view, I actually want to hear from Donald Trump. I think he's an important voice. I want to know what he thinks about what's going on with Putin at the moment. I want to know what he thinks about what's going on with Xi Jinping and China at the moment. And because of the social media ban, he has lost that platform. And whether you agree with him, whether you like him, whether you think he was the best president ever, when you think he was the worst president ever, I believe the world needs to hear from him at the moment. So at the very least, what I'm happy about Truth Social is that his posts will be able to be shown on there, and then we can pick up on them and we can talk about them and we can dissect them.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it is quite extraordinary, isn't it? If you consider the fact that Donald J. Trump, a democratically elected president in 2016, from 2016 to 2020, and yet the Taliban, Dan, remain on Twitter.
Yeah.
You know, it's okay for the Taliban to spread its medieval messaging to the world.
Well, Darren, and China.
YouTube.
And China.
Yeah, and China.
And Russia.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, China
exactly.
posting the ultimate disinformation about the Uyghur Muslims who they're wiping out. And that doesn't get a warning from Twitter.
Exactly, yeah. And Russia Today, let's not forget. All of these things, Dan, right? All of these ultimate hypocrisies,
and by the way, Darren, I'm not saying that I want them taken off social media either. I actually believe we should hear from everyone. Good, bad, evil, let's hear from them. Let's not hide views away. But if they want to allow the Taliban to continue to tweet, then they must allow the former president of the US, potentially, Darren, we don't know, but potentially a strong contender to be the next president of the US. We must hear from him.
Exactly, yes. And given that a large swathes, President Trump actually received the most votes that a sitting president had ever received. Now that, to me, that's a little bit like, Dan, people who voted Brexit not being allowed to have a platform to actually say, well, I support Brexit, right? It is exactly the same. Donald Trump has democratic legitimacy, and it was voted for overwhelmingly in 2016 and received a hell of a lot of votes in 2022. And to me, this just goes to the very heart of why it's good to have competition within the social media world. But what I will say, Dan, is that I'm worried, I'm really worried that the government are going to make it impossible for President Trump to actually put forward a challenger to these censorious tech giants by its pushing through its online safety bill, which actually it makes it, they have to remove YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, whoever, they have to remove content that's not illegal, Dan, not illegal, but deemed harmful. Now, I don't know about you, Dan, but I'm not confident that what Nick Clegg, who's at Facebook, top cheese at Facebook now, apart from Mark Zuckerberg, what he views as harmful isn't going to be what you and me view as harmful as far as speech is concerned. So do you have the confidence that making Nick Clegg the ultimate arbiter of speech online is a sensible thing to do? I certainly don't. I think it's an absolute lunacy.
It's very worrying. It's very worrying. But look, I think at least this platform gives a voice to Donald Trump, and then we can see where it goes.
Exactly.
Darren Grimes, thank you so much. It's 10 p.m. This is Dan Wootton Tonight. Still to come. As Russian tanks roll in, Boris Johnson announces sanctions against Russia over what has been internationally referred to as an invasion of Ukraine.
This is the first tranche, the first barrage of what we are prepared to do.
We'll preview how tomorrow's newspapers are reacting to a crisis that looks set to destroy peace in Europe. And I'll be joined next by my superstar panel, Dawn Neeson, Calvin Robinson and Rebecca Reade. In the next stage of my lockdown inquiry, was pursuing a suppression strategy that doomed us to a cruel winter of quarantine the biggest mistake of the pandemic? Oxford University's Director of Evidence-Based Medicine, Carl Hennigan, gives evidence on how the so-called experts got our COVID ceasefire in the summer of 2020 so devastatingly wrong. At 10:40, Joe Biden's sexual assault accuser Tara Reade says that she's been cancelled, along with other big names like Rose McGowan and Joe Rogan, for historic allegations she made against the president. Well, not on this show, she's not, and she will tell her story live. Could we face climate lockdowns in the future? One of my panellists thinks the elite are using inane events like the UK's stormy weather to maintain Project Fair post-COVID. We'll debate that next. And as Playhouse theatregoers express horror at using gender-neutral toilets where women pass blokes at the urinals, why are celebrity lovies like Eddie Redmayne forcing people to use the toilet together? And as Strictly's most successful dancer ever, Oti Mabuse sensationally quits the show, how did the BBC let themselves lose one of their biggest stars to its main rival? All that and more coming up in tonight's Media Buzz at 10:30. Plus, will Kate slide her way to victory as I crown tonight's Greatest Britain and Union Jackass? We'll find out before the end of the show. But first, the news headlines at 10 with Miranda Shunker.
Thank you. The top stories from the GB newsroom. The US president has announced a raft of economic sanctions after what's being described as the beginning of Russia's invasion into Ukraine. Joe Biden says President Putin's actions are a flagrant violation of international law, which demand a firm response. The US will now impose sanctions against 2 large Russian banks and sovereign debt. Oligarchs and their family members will also be targeted. Joe Biden also authorised the deployment of additional forces and equipment to strengthen Baltic allies, saying it's a defensive move, but the US has no intention to fight Russia.
This is the beginning of a Russian invasion of Ukraine, as he indicated and asked permission to be able to do from his Duma. Who in the Lord's name does Putin think gives him the right to declare new so-called countries on territory that belong to his neighbors? This is a flagrant violation of international law and demands a firm response from the international community.
Well, the move comes after the UK government imposed its own package of sanctions. The Prime Minister announced action against 5 Russian banks and 3 very high net worth individuals. Boris Johnson told MPs that Russia's troop deployment amounts to a renewed invasion of the country.
We will not allow Putin to drag our continent back into a Hobbesian state of nature where aggression pays and might is right. And it is precisely because the stakes are so high that Putin's venture in Ukraine must fail.
Well, Russia says it started evacuating its diplomatic personnel from Ukraine because they're receiving death threats. The move comes after President Vladimir Putin was given the green light by the Russian parliament to deploy armed forces abroad for peacekeeping tasks. There are fears that could open the door for a broader attack on Ukraine. President Putin says the situation on the ground in Donbass will dictate the actions of the military. In other news, severe flood warnings have been issued for parts of the West Midlands and Yorkshire. The Environment Agency says water levels could still rise in areas around the River Severn and the River Ouse after heavy rain fell during Storm Franklin. Flood-hit communities are calling on the government now to fund permanent defences after dozens of homes were evacuated. And a legal requirement to wear face masks in shops and on public transport will end on March the 21st in Scotland. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon says that using restrictions to suppress COVID infections are no longer needed. Coronavirus passports are also being scrapped for nightclubs and large events. In contrast to England, the Scottish Government will continue its free testing programme and will advise people who test positive to keep isolating. Well, on TV, online and DAB plus radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Dan Wootton tonight.
Tomorrow's news tonight now in our Media Buzz. And let's kick off with the very first look at the front pages hot off the press. And first up is the Metro. We'll grab him by the rules. Boris Johnson has unveiled his first package of international sanctions against Vladimir Putin after the Russian president sent troops into Ukraine. In the eye, Putin takes Europe to brink of war as NATO warns that Russia is ready for an all-out attack. In response, the UK, US and EU have all announced sanctions to target Russian banks and billionaires. And the battle to become BBC's political editor was thrown wide open today by the joint departure of John Sopel and Emily Maitlis to the new BBC, LBC. And The Independent reports that Boris Johnson has been accused of introducing tepid Russian sanctions. Critics, including the PM's rival, he said he wants to run for the leadership, Tom Tugendhat, said that the package was underpowered and would fail to deter Vladimir Putin from further aggression. My superstar panel, back with me now, former editor of the Daily Star, Dawn Neeson, conservative commentator Calvin Robinson, and the author and journalist Rebecca Reade. Now, after being battered by a trio of storms, the nation is not yet out of a bit of a weather beating, with a fourth called Gladys potentially on the way. The Met Office has issued yellow warnings for winds of up to 60 miles per hour in the northeast and Scotland tomorrow, following Storm Franklin, which caused flooding in several parts of the UK, including Yorkshire and Northern Ireland. Almost 80 flood warnings still in place. Before that, Storm Eustace tragically claimed the lives of 4 people, left 1.1 million homes without power and caused an estimated £360 million in damage on Friday, including at London's O2 Arena, which had its roof sheared off. So no one is denying that these weather events, along with Storm Dudley, which made landfall a week ago, have been bad. But these type of weather events have been fairly regular occurrences throughout history. Yet they are now being weaponised by Project Fair, desperately in search of a new brand of scaremongering now that we're coming out of our COVID nightmare. That's according to top columnist Richard Littlejohn, who wrote in the Daily Mail, "We used to be stoic in the face of bad weather. It was a proud British trait. I heard some pants wetter on the wireless describing Eunice as a bomb cyclone, as real bombs could be landing on Kiev any day now. Using the same kind of language to describe high winds is tasteless in the extreme." And right on cue, the mainstream media attempted to link these bog-standard weather events to the so-called climate crisis. Bedwetter Baroness Brown, who sits on the government's Climate Change Committee, was rolled out onto Radio 4's Today programme before the worst of Storm Eunice had hit, throwing around the emotive but generic term extreme weather event host Martha Kearney.
And with that caveat about not looking at a single storm and drawing conclusions, but can you see any kind of pattern that's emerging?
Well, I think we have seen an increase in the UK, but also globally over recent years, and particularly last year, of extreme weather events. And of course, the IPCC has told us that we can expect more of that.
Thank God for the journalist Ross Clark, who pointed out that the geographical area in which Britain sits has actually suffered fewer storms in the 2 decades leading up to 2010. According to the most recent data by the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, as he wrote in The Spectator, Storm Eunice is not a product of man-made climate change. It is not even part of a trend towards more intense storms, but a mere blip in a trend that seems to be going in the other direction. So, Dawn Neeson, it now feels like we've got Project Fair, stay at home, this is catastrophe connected to every single storm that comes blowing into the UK in the middle of winter.
Insane. My favourite thing was listening to the radio, and there was a meteorologist on there who classified people as storm deniers. We're even COVIDising the weather now. It's like I'm a storm denier because I dared to go outside my front door when there was a stiff breeze.
Or perhaps we're a storm denier when we say this isn't about climate change because we've always had storms.
We're a small rock in the North Atlantic. We always get these storms rolling in. Because we give them, frankly, stupid names now. I mean, Storm Eunice? I mean, really?
So Calvin Robinson, what is this about? Why is this push now to sort of create a lot of fear around weather events? Is it because of the climate change hysteria and the net zero hysteria?
Good question. So obviously that was just a bit of bad weather, but what we saw was almost a test for climate lockdowns, wasn't it? Everyone stay at home, don't go to work, bit of bad weather going on. And what we'll notice over the coming months is that all of these Davos lot, all of the WEF young leaders will be the ones pushing for net zero, pushing the language of climate crisis and emergency powers for the climate, different measures being put in place to protect us from the climate change crisis. And that's what it is, it's a power grab. COVID is over. The next power grab is the climate so-called crisis.
Stay home, save your lives.
Indeed.
Rebecca Reade, I couldn't bear Friday. Look, I know it was a bad storm, by the way, I understand that, but I couldn't bear putting on any mainstream media outlet, BBC, whatever, saying, stay at home, stay at home. I didn't stay at home. I made a sensible decision to be safe and to be careful. I think their job is to tell us what weather we're dealing with, not to tell us to stay at home. It's like, why have they become so addicted to telling everyone to stay at home all the time?
Well, 4 people died because they didn't stay at home. So it wasn't totally stupid to think, if I live somewhere...
Did you stay at home?
I did stay at home. I briefly went out and I felt quite stupid because it was really horrid and really wet. And I went to the shop, got what I needed and came back.
Yes, you didn't stay at home.
I stayed home for the rest of the day thinking that was really stupid. Why did I do that?
I stayed at home except when I didn't stay at home.
And then somebody who lives half a mile away from where I live died because they got hit by a falling tree. And then I felt really stupid for my semi-staying at home attitude.
But people die in car accidents every day.
There are two
you get in cars.
But you don't get in... But, for instance, I wouldn't get in a car if I was drunk or the road was icy. You make sensible decisions. There are 2 different things here. Whether this is to do with climate change, a sensible conversation. Whether it is unreasonable to say to people, the trains aren't really working and roofs are blowing off, maybe stay in your house. That's not impinging on your human rights. You shouldn't be mandated to stay at home. You weren't mandated to stay at home. You were just told staying at home is sensible.
No, and I agree with that in philosophy, but it was the changed language.
Yeah,
And let's not get up.
No,
there was
it
a big
wasn't.
one in 2013, which actually wasn't a big one. It was the one we all got told to get really excited about, and then nothing blew over. And they did the exact same thing then. They said, stay at home. It's a red weather warning. This is exactly the same thing as it's always been.
Anyone dying at any time is always a sad thing. But 4 people dying from a bad weather situation is not. 14 people die of falling off ladders a day. It's not a big thing for 4 people to have died. It's not.
Quite a big thing for 4 people who were just going about their days.
It's sad for the people and the families that lost a loved one, but I'm saying it's not a tsunami.
Yeah, and I don't belittle that at all.
Let's not overplay
I think what I'm talking about is the fact that there is a constant push to link any sort of weather event now to climate change. And the evidence doesn't back it up. So why does the BBC keep asking questions where the evidence doesn't back it up?
When we talk about the big fires in Australia, there really is a sensible suggestion that those things are linked.
It was
in
craven
this case, I
desire
agree.
to link it to climate change. Now, when I was 17, my parents commenting on me in my underwear would have been my worst nightmare. But when it comes to those weirdos, the Beckhams, apparently anything's game. So this spoiled sportsman, David, and his frowny fashionista wife, Victoria, raised eyebrows by openly celebrating these very uncomfortable-looking photos, actually, of their 17-year-old son, Cruz, to mark his birthday in the latest issue of ID magazine. Bex described the image of their youngest son sporting pink hair and grills as so cool and said he was a proud dad, while alleged singer Victoria joked, big first day as a 17-year-old. But look at that picture. He's got his trousers pulled down. It's very, very odd. This latest move from the weirdo family who want to do awful things to their children to make them famous at any cost, including their eldest, Brooklyn, who you might remember needed 62 professionals to help him make a sandwich on his cooking show, got plenty of backlash on social media, including from our own Dominique Samuels, who said, why would you be proud of this hypersexualised and on image of your young son with his pants around his ankles and his finger in his eye, David Beckham? Make it make sense. He is 17. This is a kid. The modelling industry is extremely vulnerable to predators and other questionable exploitative characters. If this was a girl, I very much doubt this image would receive such a weird reception. Dawn Neeson, they're an odd family, aren't they?
They're very odd, but I've got a mental image of you in your underwear now, thanks to that.
No one wants to see that. Apologies.
No one needs to see that ever. No, thank you for that. It's very odd. And I think Dominic's right there, because if that had been Harper, They wouldn't have done
but it won't be Harper, will it? Because
That's
Harper
what I mean.
will be
They would-
protected.
Yeah, that's what I mean. They wouldn't do it with Harper, so why would they do it with their boy?
Because there is a perception that girls are sexual and boys are not. Therefore, you can put boys with their tops off in string vests, and you have to protect girls. Our attitude towards how children are treated and young people are treated sexually is so warped. Our double standards are through the roof, and
But
you should
Calvin,
be worried
isn't
about this.
what's warped about this that the Beckhams just want all of their children to be famous at any cost, and they put them in these odd situations where they would never be if they weren't the child of a Beckham?
They're essentially pimping out their son in this photograph. That's what's going on here. I think the ladies either side of me are right. It doesn't pass the sexism test. If you replace the gender with the opposite gender, this would not be appropriate. This would not be allowed to be frowned upon.
But what
You're quite right too.
What I would say is that with them, brand Beckham has always been about being high fashion, and they wouldn't have done this for Hello magazine.
That's lowbrow.
But it's because it's for ID magazine, which is a very prestigious, very cool, very trendy magazine. Therefore, if you do it, it's somehow not sexualising your child because he's got pink hair and it's been shot by a trendy photographer.
But isn't he
this
sitting
isn't different.
Isn't he sitting on a toilet?
Yeah,
that's
it's
just a
fashion.
bit.
Look, I think
acceptable.
they are oddball parents that have done nothing to protect their children from the nasty world of fame, and they will end up regretting it. Dawn Neeson, Calvin Robinson, Rebecca Reade, thank you so much. Coming up, as Playhouse theatregoers express horror, quite rightly, at using gender-neutral toilets where women walk past the blokes with their things out at the urinal. Why are woke celebrities like Eddie Redmayne forcing people to go to the toilet together? Well, my superstar panel will be back to debate that. Plus, we'll get a first look at tomorrow's newspaper front pages as the media buzz continues. But next, why did the government pursue a doomed suppression strategy, forcing us into never-ending lockdowns? With Director of Oxford University Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine, Carl Hennigan, is next to be called in the lockdown inquiry. That's straight after the break.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
Make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel.
Right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News. Top epidemiologist and director of Oxford University's Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine, Carl Hennigan, is the next to give evidence in the lockdown inquiry. And as we emerged from the first lockdown in July 2020, the 7-day average for COVID cases had plummeted to 370 daily. But it was clear that suppressing the virus with more restrictions was not a viable long-term strategy. But as we all know, the government, plagued with anxiety and surrounded by doomsday scientists, continued to ignore the science and introduce one catastrophic restriction policy after another. There was the nonsensical rule of 6, the closing of schools for a virus that doesn't affect children, the 10 p.m. curfew, and who could forget the pub trips sponsored by substantial Scotch eggs? Now, hysterical scientists would then overreact to rising cases as people exercised their freedom, and we ended up suffering through 2 more hugely damaging and unnecessary lockdowns. Would it not have been more sensible for people to get COVID in the summer of 2020, healthy people, when cases were so low, and build up natural immunity ahead of the winter? Well, the director of Oxford University's Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine, Carl Hennigan, was an early and dedicated critic of much of the lockdown policy. He signed a letter to the Prime Minister, Chancellor and Chief Medical Officer Chris Whitty in September 2020. It was also signed by Professor Sunitra Gupta and our very own positive Professor Carol Sikora. And the letter said lockdown would cause significant harm across all age groups, offsetting any benefits. And it added, the existing policy path is inconsistent with the known risk profile of COVID-19 and should be reconsidered. The unstated objective currently appears to be one of suppression of the virus until such time that a vaccine can be deployed. This objective is increasingly unfeasible. Sadly, though, their pleas fell on deaf ears, and Carl Hennigan joins me now. Carl, look, we're obviously covering lots of different aspects of lockdown throughout our inquiry, and you've been such a strong voice, but I really wanted to hone in with you today on that period after the first lockdown leading into the catastrophic winter of 2020 into 2021. Because, Carl, looking at the evidence, do you now surmise that it would have been much better for us to not have a suppression strategy so that we could have built up a base level of immunity over that summer so that we were more prepared for the winter?
So, Dan, I think you're touching on some very important points here. Basically, 23 months in, you're starting to go back and start to retrace some of the restrictions that came in place. There were some important features that you had to get your head round the virus. And it's interesting, about 2 years in, people are now starting to understand. The first is to say that in pandemic theory, the theory suggests that young people are disproportionately affected. Whereas in seasonal pathogens, the elderly are much more affected. And okay, in some of the seasonal pathogens, the very young under ones. But as soon as you started to realise that fact, there's a huge gradient in terms of who's affected. You start to look at this as a seasonal pathogen. So that's number one point that's really important. The second point is this idea of endemicity. The virus is all around us, and we have to accept that. But if you look even into 2021, there were people saying New Zealand have got the right approach, Australia's got the right approach, Hong Kong has, because they're suppressing the infection, and it's like you can turn a tap off. But actually, with these viruses, there are so many unknowns, the way they operate and interact with us. That idea to us was the point where we put the letter out and started talking to politicians and governments to say, you have to accept this virus is all around us. Once you do that, you then change your strategy. You start to think about the issues at hand. 75% of the deaths are in over 75s. What are you going to do about that? Yeah. Remember, going into 2020, the argument was we're going to turn the tap off, and by November, we're all going to get back to normal. And we would say, hey, hold on a minute, winter's coming, you need to get prepared. You need to think radically differently about this suppression strategy.
Well, yes, because it's interesting that you raise November 2020, because, of course, remember, that's when we had that circuit breaker lockdown. And, of course, that made no difference either, did it, Carl Hennigan? Just like the so-called circuit breaker lockdown in Wales made no difference.
And if you remember, before that, we'd had local authority rules. That meant places like Leicester, Oldham had been in tier 4 lockdowns permanently right up to that point in time. Then you had Wales saying we're going to have a circuit breaker, and we're going to have this circuit breaker in England, and that will give us a great reset. The problem with that approach is what you know, and now everybody realizes, as soon as you open up, you have a significant portion of the population who's still susceptible. So what you do is you push more and more people into winter who are susceptible. And then you increase the potential burden of the disease when the transmission is the highest. And what we should have been talking about going into winter, some very simple measures I was talking about to the government. For instance, why not just increase the Christmas break for school children. You could take it from the 2 weeks to 3 weeks to 4 weeks, minimise the disruption on society, and that would give us a natural break, which was what was come next. But this idea of a circuit breaker, again, was a suppression strategy where people said we'd reset and then we'll use test and trace and all of that to manage this below 1,000, and we'll keep it below 1,000 forever until we get a vaccine that prevents transmission. They weren't interested in preventing disease. These people were on about we're going to suppress it and then we're going to get to the zero COVID policy. Again, a great
Which was
mistake.
a pipe dream. It was a pipe dream. And it meant as well, Carl, that the government introduced a whole raft of interventions that look laughable now. But tell me, from your evidence-based position, was the rule of 6, the 10 p.m. closure of hospitality venues, the ban on singing in Scotland, you know, all of these sort of, the Scotch egg rule, you know, all of those sort of weird policies, did any of them make any difference to the spread of coronavirus in the UK?
So we wrote a number of articles at the time, many of them are in The Spectator, questioning these issues like rule of 6. Who had come up with that rule? Had it been tried before? Had it been tested? Had anybody had any experience? And if so, is there any evidence? And all of them had 0. So what you now know is there was a group of people sat at the heart of government who were deciding policies, trying to say we need a policy that we're just going to make up, that will somehow inflict on us, the population, some measure that will change the course of the infection. One might argue, actually, it did the exact opposite. And I'll give you an area where it did do the exact opposite, in care homes. Because actually, by the time you got to the end of 2021, just into January, February, you were looking at in excess of 80% of care homes having outbreaks. So if you'd have tried, you couldn't have got it to more care homes. And that's where 30% of the deaths were. And that's one of my points. I kept saying, if 1/3 of the problem is in one setting, why are you not putting your resources there to go and look after
especially given the most vulnerable people in society was in that setting. No, Carl Hennigan, absolutely fascinating evidence. Thank you so much for bringing it to us. That was the clinical epidemiologist, director of the University of Oxford Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine, Carl Hennigan, who has been one of the voices of sanity throughout this pandemic. So it was so important to have him as part of the inquiry. Coming up, Joe Biden's sexual assault accuser, Tara Reade, says that she's been cancelled, along with other big names like Julian Assange and Joe Rogan, for historic allegations she made against the US president. Well, not on this show, she's not. She'll tell her story live in Uncancelled at 10:40. The next in Media Buzz, as Playhouse theatregoers expressed horror at using gender-neutral toilets where women walk past men at urinals. Why are celebrity lovies forcing people to use the toilet together? My superstar panel debate that after the break.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News. And let's return to tomorrow's news tonight on the Media Buzz. Lots of front pages just delivered to me and one story dominating. So let's have a look. In The Guardian, Vladimir Putin has said Russia will support the territorial claims of proxy states in East Ukraine, increasing the likelihood of a larger conflict in the near future. In response, US President Joe Biden has said tonight, who in the Lord's name does Putin think gives him the right to declare so-called countries? Boris, stop mad Vlad. That's the take from The Sun. Britain is to send more weapons to embattled Ukraine within days after Boris Johnson warned Putin was behaving illogically and in an irrational frame of mind. The Prime Minister has come under fire for not making sanctions against the Russian president tougher. And my goodness, this is an interesting one. Elton John caught in a terrifying mid-air drama when his private jet suffered hydraulic failure at 10,000 feet. The plane twice aborted landing on a day winds hit 80 miles per hour and fire crews had to race to Farnborough Airport. But luckily, he survived it. The Daily Telegraph leads with President Biden's stark warning that Putin's invasion has just begun and could bring untold suffering to millions of Ukrainians. Also on the front page, the paper reports that the impact of Russia's invasion will be felt here in the UK, as it is likely to cause a further rise in energy bills. The Daily Mail also quote Biden in their coverage. Twisted Putin is ready for bloodshed. That's quite a chilling front page. As Britain and the US target Russian oligarchs, the Express lead on growing calls to punish Putin harder now. And like the rest of the newspapers, they report that tougher sanctions are on the way as fears intensify of an all-out invasion of Ukraine. That'll learn them, say the Star, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, as they report that Boris' sanctions package were blasted as tepid. Is that how you deal with bullies, bozo? The paper asks. And Dawn Neeson there in the corner too. She's, of course, a member of our superstar panel tonight, alongside Calvin Robinson and Rebecca Reade too. Now, there's a real West End drama unfolding over gender-neutral toilets at the Playhouse Theatre. Now, following similar moves at the Barbican and Old Vic, lovey theatre-goers paying hundreds of pounds to see Oscar-nominated actor Eddie Redmayne in the hit West End musical Cabaret now have to make use of unisex restrooms in a move to be more inclusive. But despite the theatre receiving rave reviews for its rendition of the iconic musical which explores promiscuity and gender fluidity in 1930s Berlin, behind the scenes, theatre-goers have been left mortified after encountering the new toilet set-up with patrons blasting the fact that women have to pass men using the urinals, yes, the urinals, to reach the cubicles. How invasive is that? Not just for the women having to go past, but for the men too. Now, Dawn Neeson, this is a real problem that I have with this push to erase gender in society, unisex toilets. And I saw this myself, actually. I attended a production at the very woke university, Harvard University. You know, it's just outside Boston. So it's really the world's home of woke. This was a couple of years ago. It was absolutely revolting. I was there at the urinal, which you have to use, you know, to go for a pee. And I'm not joking. I had 20 women surrounding me waiting to go to the urinals. I'm not even joking. I counted because it was such a traumatizing experience. Now, the wokies in America might think that's normal, but the stiff upper lip Brits should not have to accept this nonsense.
Sorry. I'm sorry. Well, they're calling their friends in. Look, it's Dan Wootton. What was going on?
They're laughing hysterically. What do you call that?
Dawn, that's rude.
Sorry. Sorry, no,
Dawn,
seriously.
I had to get the magnifying glass out.
Not take it as cold.
Can we restore this? This is a news programme.
Sorry.
Is it?
Some decorum, please, children.
Look, I mean, in theory, gender-neutral cubicles aren't the end of the world. I think we can cope with them.
They are for me.
Well, obviously, you've got issues here, Dan. You really need to help. But, I mean, it's the urinals thing. I mean, no, it's unfair on the men. It's unfair on the women.
I mean, Kevin, look, we don't want to have to talk in detail, do we? But the point is, the whole point of a urinal is you have to be exposed, and you don't want to be exposed as a man when you're surrounded by women. It's not fair for anyone.
Anywhere else, that would be a crime, wouldn't it? That kind of exposure. I don't think it's right. It's completely inappropriate. But even if it's in cubicles, it's wrong. We need to protect women's spaces. So, that, women are the most vulnerable sex. We need to make sure that they're not taken advantage of by inappropriate men in a very vulnerable setting.
I think the major issue here is that
you just got me vulnerable.
Whoa.
Nothing vulnerable about Dawn Newsom.
Can I try and say some sensible things?
Which sex?
Well, do you support these gender-neutral atrocities?
When you actually make a gender-neutral loo, as in you make segregated, fully confined cubicles with a sink inside them, that's fine, that's not a problem. A lot of theatres need to have a better system because the women take longer in the loo than men do. This isn't real gender-neutral loos. This is changing the signs on the gendered loos and then expecting everybody to go along with it.
I know, but that's the wokery at play. That's what they do.
This is the laziness. This isn't investing any money to make a better system.
I know, but Rebecca, do you not understand, though? In a theatre, you can't actually do it without the urinals and the cubicles because you have a very small interval, right? You've got about 15 minutes where you have to get hundreds of people very quickly through the loos. So you can't make them all cubicles. You have to use the urinals.
In lots of theatres, not necessarily the London ones that are Victorian and largely underground, possibly not. But in newer theatres, the Barbican is a really good example. The Barbican could absolutely do it right, but they did it wrong on purpose. They just changed the signs and then let people work it out. I've walked into the Barbican and I've seen penises I didn't want to see. That isn't in the loos.
Exactly.
But that isn't a problem.
So do you call for these gender-neutral toilets to end now?
If you're going to do it properly, but that costs money and takes time.
No, don't do it at all.
What you can't do is swap the signs and hope for the best.
I might be being dense, but I've got a question. Who is it including? If it's more inclusive, who is it including?
People who are gender non-conforming. It also apparently, I'm just telling you the official party line, it circumvents the problem of people being expected to choose a gender to use a loo, and it circumvents the problem of people being told they're in the wrong loo if you don't look like the gender you're ascribing to be. That is the official party line.
Is that a large demographic, do you think?
I would imagine it is probably about 1%.
So now we're going to have groups of women surrounding blokes at the urinal, which I think actually makes the women vulnerable and I think it makes the men vulnerable.
No one wants to see that.
And it's just so ridiculous. We need to stop this madness.
Especially when you've only got a small interval, Dan.
Probably should clarify that Eddie Redmayne wasn't in charge of actually making this decision.
Well, he could also stand up against this sort of woke nonsense,
I think probably. But
given he didn't even stand up for J.K. Rowling, I think we know that's not going to come from Eddie Redmayne. But anyway, as we saw on the front pages of the newspapers, the world's eyes have, of course, been trained on the Russia-Ukraine border in recent days, and one man has been bringing nations together across Europe and beyond with the latest developments in their mother tongues. So this is Philip Crowther, an international affiliate correspondent for the Associated Press, who has gone viral for showing off his impressive language skills on Twitter with a clip of him reporting on the situation in English, Luxembourgish, Spanish, Portuguese, French and German. My God, I'm jealous. I hate this man. Have a look at him.
Been a war with Russian-backed forces in the east, the Donbass region, for 8 years now.
Natürlich ist schon ein gewisses und der Krieg gewinnt, der natürlich schon am Gang ist. Dos reuniones que va a mantener el presidente francés hoy en Moscú con el presidente ruso Vladimir Putin y mañana. Moscovo brandiu o anúncio de retirada da terça-feira como prova de que os temores da guerra foram fabricados por ocidente hostil. La guerre semble probable, c'est aussi simple que cela, mais il y a encore cette petite lueur d'espoir que la diplomatie puisse arrêter une invasion russe de l'Ukraine. Das ist genau das, was sie erwartet hatten. Desinformation, gefälschte Angriffe und ein Vorwand für Russland, in die Ukraine einzumarschieren.
What a show-off, but seriously impressive. No other languages spoken here on Dan Wootton tonight. I can promise you that. Just the truth. Now, Strictly Come Dancing fans are in mourning after one of the show's best ever pro dancers, Oti Mabuse, announced today that she's quit after 7 years. The South African stunner is one of only 2 pros in Strictly's 70 years history to win the Glitter Ball trophy twice. First with former Emmerdale star Calvin Fletcher in 2019, then in a surprise victory with comedian Bill Bailey the following year. But after appearing as a judge on ITV shows Dancing on Ice and The Masked Dancer, Oti appears to have now permanently waltzed on over to the BBC's arch rival. Now, for the BBC, to lose one of their top stars comes as a massive blow, and I think the bosses may well regret overlooking Oti for the judging panel on Strictly Come Dancing. Remember they did that weird thing? They gave it to her older sister, Motsi. I love her as well, but I mean, come on. You've just lost Oti from the show. What are you doing at the BBC? Nuts. Dawn Neeson, Calvin Robinson, Rebecca Reade. Do stand by, because coming up, my superstar panel, you know this is my favourite part of the show. They will nominate for today's Greatest Britain and Union Jackass. But next in Uncancelled, Joe Biden's sexual assault accuser Tara Reade says she was cancelled along with other big names like Joe Rogan for historic allegations she made against the president. She'll tell her story live, but first, a very quick look at what's coming up in tomorrow's show.
Coming up on Dan Wootton tonight, the man who rocked number 10 by resigning in protest of hardline COVID policies, former Brexit Minister Lord David Frost, gives valuable insight into the decision-making in Westminster as my lockdown inquiry continues. As the Queen struggles following her positive test, have the royals been shaken, or is it business as usual within the firm? Royal expert Robert Jobson joins me for Crown Jewels. Plus, as lefty journalist Emily Maitlis steps down from the BBC, I'll get the view of columnist extraordinaire Rod Liddell, who she accused of being racist in one of her many impartiality breaches. And as ever, I'll break down the day's top stories with my superstar panel, the Daily Mail columnist Amanda Platel, political commentator Daisy McAndrew, and social media activist Adam Brooks. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
But it's time now for Uncancelled. And this is where the world's silence voices speak out on controversial issues without the fear of the cancel culture sweeping the rest of the media. 3 years ago, Tara Reade accused Joe Biden of sexually assaulting her in 1993 by pinning her against the wall of the US Senate building. The then aide in his Senate office claims that when she forced the now US president off her, he became hostile and told her, "I thought you liked me. You're nothing to me now." Biden's spokespeople have consistently rejected the allegations, and he issued this public denial in 2020.
Would you please go on the record with the American people? Did you sexually assault Tara Reade?
No, it is not true. I'm saying unequivocally, it never happened. And it didn't. It never happened.
But since coming forward to make her allegations, Tara says she has been vilified, hounded and denounced in a celebrity and journalist campaign of demonisation. She believes the liberal US media has now rendered her cancelled, alongside other figures who don't toe the line, like Rose McGowan, Joe Rogan and Julian Assange. But she's not cancelled on this show. So it's a pleasure to welcome the activist and author Tara Reade, who joins us live from the US now. Tara Reade, this is so ironic, isn't it? Because wasn't it Joe Biden and his supporters who were pushing the whole concept of believing any allegations of sexual assault? But when it came to Biden and you, they took a markedly different approach.
Yes, and thank you for having me on your show. It's a great honor. Thank you.
Great to have you.
As far as the allegations, I came forward with 7 other women, and there are others who are too afraid to come forward for obvious reasons. But Joe, it was in the middle of the campaign, and actually at the time I was coming forward, he was going to drop out of the campaign because he wasn't doing very well. And what's interesting is he spent $2.2 million, according to FEC records, on public relations, on media placement, on trying to vilify and cancel me. Right out the gate, he called me a Russian agent. His campaign did, told the New York Times, Washington Post, AP, all the big ones, implied that somehow I was a Russian agent. They dug through my life, tried to find things. I was accused of perjury. I was threatened with prison. I've had death threats. I've been called a traitor over and over because I don't believe that we should have a war with Russia, and I don't believe that. I think it's the U.S. government basically trying to distract from the failures of domestic policy, and that makes me an outlier, right, for those beliefs. But instead of dealing with the actual assault allegation, they just distracted with this other thing. So they didn't investigate Joe Biden. There's never been a proper investigation. And I did go through protocol. I did file a sexual harassment report that is sealed in the University of Delaware, and he will not unseal them. I also made a police report. And to date, he has never been investigated properly, only by the media that he's paid for.
And obviously, Joe Biden has been accused, Tara Reade, of a lot of creepy behaviour by other women. You know, there was all of the touching of the hair and the touching of the shoulders. And I mean, we saw that on camera. I mean, we're looking at some of it now. But your allegations were much more serious. You say that Joe Biden sexually assaulted you. This wasn't creepy touching. This was sexual abuse.
No, he physically went underneath my clothes. He penetrated me with his fingers and up against a wall, and I pushed him away. He was underneath my shirt, underneath my skirt. And I pulled away, and that's when he got angry. And as you had said, his exact words were, "You're nothing to me. You're nothing." And I remember, flashes of just my whole body shaking and knowing it wasn't just the assault. My career was over. I had said no, and he had a very big ego. And later, when I filed the sexual harassment, I started getting retaliated at work. All my duties were pulled away. I was sent to a room with no windows. I was told not to interact with staff. I was told that even if I went to the restroom, I had to call my superior. And that's how they dealt with it. Basically,
so you think he was trying to force you out of your job?
Oh, immediately. As soon as I filed the sexual harassment, yeah. He never spoke to me. One other interaction that I had with him right before I left was, weirdly enough, at a meeting, he came up behind me and put his hand on my shoulder and put his thumb underneath my hair and rubbed my neck. And I called my mother when I got home from work, and she said, this isn't about sex, it's about power. And he was letting you know that you have no voice, And
I guess you feel like you have no voice now, because the US media, as you say, has effectively cancelled you, that they have decided not to take your allegations seriously.
Well, I mean, there have been journalists that have been very good with investigative reporting. Ryan Grimm from The Intercept, Rich McHugh, who was Ronan Farrow's writing partner, and very well known. He's done investigative reporting. So, Katie Halper, Megyn Kelly. So there's been some very good journalists that have actually tried to tell my story. But you're right. For the most part, you're not going to see me on mainstream media and in America anyway. And like, for instance, with Fox and that, they do stories on me. But remember, I'm not a Republican. I'm not politically affiliated at all with anyone at this point.
No, but you were a Democrat, I believe.
Lifelong Democrat, multi-generational. And I worked for Leon Panetta. I worked for Joe Biden. I worked on a congressional campaign.
Yeah.
I was.
So my point is, there was no political motivation for you to speak out against Joe Biden. You didn't have a problem with Joe Biden being in the White House because he's a Democrat. The reason you spoke out when you did, I presume, is that you couldn't believe the man who you say sexually assaulted you was about to become the leader of the free world.
Exactly. And he had already been vice president, and that was hard. My daughter at the time was young, and I was afraid to come forward. And there was no Me Too movement and no mechanism. I thought when I came forward with some other women, I would be surrounded by the Me Too movement. I didn't know the level of hypocrisy of the Democratic elites. But you saw it with former Governor Cuomo. You see it with Biden. You see it with others.
Democrats.
They don't want to cancel Democrats. They don't want to cancel Democrats. They're more than happy to cancel men on the right when there is very little evidence, but when it comes to their heroes, they don't want to do it. I just wonder, Tara Reade, do you hold out hope that history may change the way the world looks at you? Because, of course, I think of Monica Lewinsky, and I think of the way that she was treated in the late 90s, and there has been a re-evaluation of Lewinsky in recent years.
I can't predict the future in that regard. I've let go of any restorative justice. But what I would say is that what I can do with the small platform I have is help other survivors, which I try to do, and with resources and, basically like that. And also I've been speaking very loudly about peace.
Yes, and there's your book. We're looking at your book, which you've obviously written. And look, Tari, even Joe Biden's supporters concede that he has been absolutely terrible as president. He is arguably shaping up to be one of the worst presidents in US history. I know it must be hard for you to see him there in the White House on a daily basis, but how do you evaluate his performance as president? And are you surprised by what a flop he's been in power?
I'm actually surprised by a flop. I thought there would be a little better, but he's been unable, with the Democrats in our country, in the United States, they have the House, the Senate, and the White House. They should be able to pass legislation. No legislation's been passed. Our infrastructure's crumbling. We have over 500,000 people homeless. 25% of children are in poverty right now. And they're not, and now they're talking about going to war because I think they're distracting from his utter failure. His poll numbers show he's at 20%. So he's the lowest polling in the history of US presidents, lower than Donald Trump.
Oh, yeah. No, indeed. I think he's been a disaster. Well, look, Tara Reade, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story with Britain, because that's why we have Uncancelled, for folk who are not being given a voice elsewhere. Of course, we do bring you both sides of the argument here on GB News. So in response to Ms. Reade's allegations, Biden's then campaign manager for the presidential election and now his White House communications director, Kate Bedingfield, said in a statement, Vice President Biden has dedicated his public life to changing the culture and the laws around violence against women. He authored and fought for the passage and reauthorization of the landmark Violence Against Women Act. He firmly believes that women have a right to be heard and heard respectfully. Such claims should also be diligently reviewed by an independent press. What is clear about this claim, it is untrue. This absolutely did not happen. That was the activist and author Tara Reade. But time now to reveal today's Greatest Britain and Union Jackass. My superstar panel back with me now. Dawn Neeson, who's your nomination for Greatest Britain?
Greatest Britain is Kate, the Duchess of Cambridge.
Oh, yes, and I think we've got a video as to why. Let me just tell you, though, it does contain flash photography. Dawn, she's just lovable, isn't she? She's the last best hope for the royal family at the moment.
Look, I must confess, I'm not her greatest fan normally, but she's on a solo trip to Denmark. She's representing the Queen. She's getting down. She's playing with the kids. She's learning about the pioneering efforts to give infants a better start in life over in Denmark. And you know what? At the end of this stand, she's not going to ask anyone, why is no one asking how I'm feeling?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Good point. Calvin Robinson, your nominee.
Majid Nawaz, because he's on a truth crusade. He got cancelled by the woke LBC. He's now on Spotify, on Joe Rogan's podcast, which nearly didn't make the cut, and he's exposing the WEF, which is fantastic.
Rebecca Reade, your nominee.
Jerry from Big Jet TV.
Oh, I think we've got a video for this too.
Got it. Look at the ailerons, man. Bosh! Flipping it.
I've got to go with Kate Middleton, though. I'm sorry, Rebecca, as my Greatest Britain, because that was just a delightful video. Union Jackass time now, though. Dawn Neeson, your nominee.
I'm going to go for Sajid Javid, who has sternly warned us all to carry on wearing masks in public transport in London. This is a bloke who travels everywhere in a chauffeur-driven limo paid for by the taxpayers.
Calvin Robinson, your nominee.
Leah Thomas, this is the bloke that entered the women's swimming contest. He was 426th in the male swimming contest. He's now first place in the women's. He is cheating, it's unfair, and we need to protect women's sport.
Rebecca Reade, your nominee.
I have temporarily forgotten who my... Pretty Patel!
Well, you can't win because you're clearly not passionate about it, Rebecca. What's she done? Or have you just chosen her because you just want to beat up on Pretty like all the liberal media do?
It doesn't matter what I say now, does it? But she was saying that misogyny shouldn't be a hate crime because it'd be tokenistic. But I feel I've lost this argument, really.
You've lost, I'm afraid. You've absolutely lost. Today's Union Jackass, though, another Tory Cabinet Minister, Sajid Javid. Drop the masks, mate. The masks don't work. The cloth masks are a joke, and I can't believe that you're backing Sajid, the failed London Mayor Sadiq Khan, with this policy. No, no, no. Brilliant superstar panel tonight. Dawn Neeson, Calvin Robertson, Rebecca Reade, thank you so much. I'm, of course, back again tomorrow night from 9 p.m. Lord Frost here. Headliners now, though.
Good evening. The winds are calming down at the moment, but they're going to pick up again tomorrow. A windy Wednesday with wet weather for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Largely dry day to come across most of England and Wales. This weather front's been pushing south today, and it's going to be followed by a similar one tomorrow. And as that one approaches, the isobars squeezing together, so the winds will increase through tomorrow. But at the moment, certainly compared to recent days, the winds are a lot lighter, and with clear skies, that's allowing temperatures to fall. So quite a cold night across England and Wales. But here comes that next band of rain into the northwest, and the winds picking up here as well. Enough of a breeze to stop too much of a frost, but certainly in the countryside, temperatures are likely to drop down close to zero. But a bright start for the Midlands, southern and eastern England on Wednesday. Some good spells of sunshine. The winds will strengthen, though. We do have a Met Office yellow warning across northeast England and southeast Scotland. Gusts of wind of 40, 50, maybe 60 miles an hour. A wet afternoon for Northern Ireland and central Scotland, and the rain starting to turn more and more to snow across the far northwest as colder air pushes in here, but quite mild still for England and Wales, where, bar the odd shower, most will have a dry day. We will see the rain pushing southwards, though, during Wednesday night, and then we're going to see more of the snow showers coming in, and we have another Met Office yellow warning for snow and wind across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, and that lasts well into Thursday as well. We'll start with rain across East Anglia and the southeast on Thursday. That should scoot away, and then we'll see sunshine and showers, but these showers of snow could cause some problems with the snow really building up, especially on some of the higher routes. But even at low levels for a time, some snow on Thursday across western Scotland and Northern Ireland, perhaps even into parts of southeast Scotland. With those strong winds, that's going to make for some pretty hazardous driving conditions. Sunny spells for many elsewhere on Thursday, but it's going to feel cold wherever you are.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe.